2011, and this is an oral history interview with Charles Everett Southwick, Captain USN, retired. And he's going to tell us about his history with the Navy and a few other things. And my name is Ron Carrico, and I'm going to conduct the interview. That's just the overview here. So
the people that fly airplanes, especially military airplanes, are mostly Type A personalities, and so we don't seem to have much trouble talking.
Well, a fighter pilots especially, I think. Well, I don't know. Especially at the bar on a Friday night.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Then you see all this.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm going to start off by saying this is the San Diego Air and Space Museum is gathering and archiving oral histories of significant aviation interest. Hopefully they will one day all be available online. That's the idea.
Oh, okay.
Currently the catalog is online, but to view, listen, or read the transcriptions, the histories are only available at the library itself, so you have to actually come down here. The object of the interview is to record the personal histories of interest in aviation highlights. Hopefully it's an hour and a half to 2 hours long. I'm going to try and ask simple and relevant questions with some follow-up for clarifications. We'll start with all the mundane stuff first, and hopefully we can end with some personal insights. After we complete the tape, I'll have it transcribed for you to review, edit, and clarify where necessary. And I have a donation form for you to sign later. It'll be to donate the interview to the museum to be archived. So here we are. It's August the 3rd, 2011. We're in the boardroom of the San Diego Air and Space Museum. It's 1 o'clock. And with me is Captain Charles Everett Southwick, otherwise known as Ev Southwick. So we're going to go real simple questions. Where were you born?
I was born in Fairbanks, Alaska on the 6th of October, 1931 in St. Joseph's Hospital on the banks of the Chena River. We used to refer to it as the Chena Slough. But,
what were your parents' names and occupations?
my father was named Charles Ulysses Southwick. And he was actually, when I was born, he was, I believe, the professor of English and foreign languages at College, Alaska, which became a university in about 1936 or 30, I think it was 1936 or 37. And it grew bigger, but he was pretty much the humanities department because College, Alaska was a mining engineering school, and it was the only institution of higher learning in Alaska.
Wait, how about your mom? What did she do?
She, my mom was a housewife. I mean, they met in Seattle. My dad was in World War I as a doughboy and went to school on the equivalent of the GI Bill starting in about 1918, I guess.
Wow.
18 or 19, and he was class of 23 out of the University of Washington. And my mother's name was Elizabeth, maiden name Miller, and she was born in the Palouse country in southeastern Washington, the wheat country. A large family. She had, I think she was the middle of 11 children.
Wow. So you moved back down to Seattle then, and went to high school in Seattle?
I finished high school in Seattle. What happened is, I don't want to belabor this, but in 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, in fact, I was standing with my mother at the age of 10 in our kitchen on the campus of College, Alaska, outside of Fairbanks, 5 miles outside of Fairbanks, when the announcement was made about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And I was old enough to know that was a significant thing. I mean, my dad followed the news and all that sort of thing. So there was a discussion in the house that kind of clued me in as to what was going on. And there was a great deal of concern. I look back on it now, but my dad became an air raid warden. They had they had curtains on the windows and turned the lights out at night and all that kind of stuff. Of course.
But then you went to college in Seattle.
Yes. Well, in 1940, after the December 42, they in the fall of, I think it was the fall of 42, they shut down the university academically, and the Army took over the campus.
Oh, wow.
And so my dad, we had to move back down to Seattle. And so we moved back down to Seattle. And my dad was applying for a direct commission in the Army as a major. It was something that he had been encouraged to do because of his language skills, with the understanding that after the war we were going to have to send people in to run the, he was fluent. He taught German, French, Spanish, Italian, and the Romance languages.
Yeah.
And he also started studying Russian. We used to have they would ferry the B-17s to Russia through Fairbanks. And so I'd run into these, we would run into these Russian crews in downtown Fairbanks. They'd be shopping at the local drugstore or something, buying stuff for their wives or sweethearts, things that they'd never seen before in their lives. And we tuned into the tower frequencies, when they were leaving Ladd Field.
So you had an early interest in aviation then?
Oh, very much so. I built model airplanes, serially, from the age of about 6 or 7 on.
So now you went to college. What did you?
Well, here's what happened. We got to Seattle, and my dad was having some trouble passing the physical examination, and he was first diagnosed with anemia. So he began eating a lot of liver, and it was what he really had was leukemia.
Oh.
And he died of leukemia in early '43.
Oh, right.
So my mother is stuck, and my baby sister was born. I think I was 12 years old at the time, and so she never knew her father. She was six months old when my dad died, and we lived with some friends for a while, because here's my mother, you understand, with a 12-year-old son and a 6-month-old baby. And there was some insurance money, but eventually she had to go back to work, and she ended up striking a deal with one of my father's sisters, who was a school teacher, unmarried, my good old Aunt Minnie, who was like a second mother to me, and they went together, and Minnie bought a house on the GI Bill, and we all lived together. And so I went to high school at Renton Junior Senior High School, and then I went to the University of Washington.
Did you get your commission out of that?
No, I joined the fraternity that my father was one of the charter members of, the chapter at the University of Washington of Alpha Delta Phi. Incidentally, Teddy Roosevelt was an Alpha Delta. That's one of the more famous ones that we claim. But, and I worked my way through college. I hashed at I waited tables and washed dishes at the fraternity house in order to pay my house bill, and then I inherited through the fraternity house a job at a salmon cannery up in southeastern Alaska. The Waterfall Cannery, which is now the Waterfall Resort. I mean, if people who are, and it was an idyllic place to spend the summer, I can tell you that. But anyway, and I'd come back in the fall with enough money to last, to pay my tuition and books and all that, and doing some part-time work going to school. So I worked my way through school.
So how'd you get a commission then?
Well, I don't want to. It's kind of a long story, but what happened was the third summer that I went up there. The first 2 summers I worked in the store, the company store. I was a storekeeper in the company store. The third year I wanted to work on a boat, on a cannery tender.
Oh boy!
And I went on as a deckhand on a cannery tender, and it was home ported in Seattle. So we'd drive it up to the cannery in the spring, and then drive it back in the fall. Well, I ended up not being able to get credit for some courses And so when it comes to the spring of 1953, when I'm supposed to be graduating, I am some credits shy of being able to graduate. And then, and incidentally, when I was working up there as a storekeeper, one of my duties was to be the mailman. And the only way you could get to the cannery was by amphibian, airplane, or boat. Well, there was a regular service, Ellis Airlines out of Ketchikan, that would have the mail service up there. So they'd come through 3 or 4 times a day. I got to know the pilots because I'd meet every airplane that came in. There were a bunch of Grumman gooses that surplus out of World War II, and anyway, a bunch of Navy guys. And I had the opportunity on a couple of occasions to hop in the right seat when they didn't have any passengers. They're going to fly up to an Indian village and then come back. Mm-hmm. No passengers. Hey, kid, you want to ride? And I'd ask Charles Bradford, Brad, who was my boss, he was the chief accountant there, if I could, take 30 minutes off. He said, yeah, go ahead, lock the store. And so I got to, to sit in the right seat a couple of times and take off and come back and all that kind of stuff.
And you were hooked.
Yeah, I was hooked. In the spring of, and I was an ROTC, Army ROTC, because when I first registered in the fall of '49, there's no war going. Furthest thing from my mind was the prospect of military service. University of Washington is a land-grant institution. 2 years of ROTC required.
Oh.
So I happened to be in the Army line and at registration, so I just signed up for Army ROTC, paying no attention to it. Of course, over the summer, I'd gotten about 6 chunks of mail from the Navy saying, "Oh, come take the tests for the regular program and all this kind of stuff," into the circular file, right?
Yeah.
The spring of '53, I was about ready to be commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army, infantry. And if I'm not mistaken, the Korean War was not quite wrapped up yet. Maybe it was, but in the process, one afternoon in the spring, I was laying on the roof of my cousin's house in Laurelhurst, which is very close to the University of Washington campus, and it's only about 1.5 miles from Sandpoint Naval Air Station. And the Blue Angels flew overhead, flying, if I'm not mistaken, F-9 F-2s, yeah. And I said to myself, I want to do that. And I had a couple of fraternity brothers who'd gone down to Navy flight training, so I went out to Sandpoint and took the tests and all that kind of stuff, and it was accepted. And so I went in and resigned my Army ROTC commission because the last 2 years, junior and senior year, you got a small stipend. It was not a lot of money, but I had to pay it in order to get out of the obligation. And then I started flight training in the fall of '53. And
so they took the Army commission, changed it into a Navy commission.
I didn't get commissioned there. I went into the aviation cadet program.
Oh.
And I knew all about the aviation cadet program from one of my fraternity brothers who had gone down and started flight training and then decided he didn't like it, and he came back. He was a Navy Reserve guy, and he just reverted to he was a Navy Reserve enlisted guy. He reverted to his Navy Reserve status, and then he applied for and got accepted in the ROTC program. So he lost about a year, I guess. But he talked to me about the Aviation Cadet Choir. And at that time, the Naval Aviation Cadet Choir was a big recruiting thing. And I joined the choir 2 weeks after I got into pre-flight. And 5 weeks after I started pre-flight, I got my uniforms early, along with a couple of other guys that were contemporaries of mine, and off we go to New York, and we sang in the Ed Sullivan Show. And of course, my mother went crazy and all that sort of thing. And we had it lengthened out our training by about 3 months, but the summer of '54, we were gone all the time. In the summertime, we flew out to, among other things that we did, we flew out to Long Beach, California to sing at the Miss Universe contest, and then we escorted the Miss Universe contestants to a big ball that evening. So, you know, there were lots of fringe benefits. Had a ball, but I got commissioned and got my wings in April of '55.
And then and your first airplane out of that was
The FJ3.
the FJ3. Why don't you show us
This
what
one
that
right
looks
here.
like?
This, yeah. I and my best buddy, Fred Hazlett, God rest his soul, we went all the way through flight training together, went through advanced flight training together because we were both in the choir. We got our commission in wings the same day, reported to Moffett Field, awaiting the recommissioning of Aircraft 21. On the first, it was supposed to be, it was recommissioned on the 1st of July, 1955, to get FJ3s, this airplane right here. And
No, the Air Force call it the Sabre. What did the Navy call it?
the Fury. Interestingly enough, North American first proposed this design, this basic design, to the Navy, because North American had built an FJ1 for the Navy, which was a straight wing airplane. And they didn't buy very many of them, but when they came up with the swept wing design, the Navy, and I think that I don't know if there were still battleship admirals running the thing or not, but anyway, they said, oh, we can't land a swept wing airplane on an aircraft carrier. And so they turned around to the Air Force and they said, hey, it looks good to us, so we'll buy them. And then, of course, it became famous in Korea. And somewhere along there, the Navy got interested. And my first commanding officer was a man by the name of Paul Pugh, who, as a lieutenant commander, in probably 53 or 54, somewhere in there, about a year before he came to take over the squadron, was on exchange duty with the Air Force, flying F-86s out of Japan and then Korea. And he, in order of rank, he was the number 2 guy in the squadron. Somehow, the skipper of the Air Force squadron, he got sick or whatever the heck it was, and so Paul ended up, at least temporarily, being in command of the squadron. And in about 2 weeks, they went to Korea. In about 2 weeks, Paul got 2 confirmed kills and a probable. And I don't think anyone else in the squadron got a shot at a MiG. And so they said, and this is, my understanding is that the Air Force said, hey, we can't stand, we're not going to put up with this kind of publicity, and they shipped him back to Japan. Paul, back to Japan. There someplace is a book, and I don't know if you know the name Jabara, an Air Force officer by the name of Jabara was either the number 2 or number 3 ace or maybe the number 1 ace in Korea. And he was Paul Pugh's wingman. And he said, Paul Pugh taught me everything I know about combat.
Yeah, wow.
And I was fortunate enough to be Paul's wingman for 2 years, and I'll tell you, he was something else.
So what kind of missions did you fly with the
just
FJ3?
at this time we're just flying in the daytime. I mean, you know, off the ship anyway. Is what I'm saying. No, we didn't fly the FJ3 off of the ship at night at that time. But we did. You know, it was just a fighter mission, air to air, primarily air to air. We shoot gunnery and all that kind of stuff.
What was the airplane? Was this a supersonic airplane?
No. Well, it was technically. We got our mockbusters pinned. The only way you could break the speed of sound is if you in a dive.
Yeah. In fact, there's what was her name? That the lady pilot that broke the sound barrier with one.
Cochran,
right. I think she went 1.1 or something like that.
Yeah.
Probably in a dive.
Yeah, but the FJ3 didn't have it simply wasn't designed. Didn't have the thrust. Didn't have enough thrust to overcome the drag in level flight to get supersonic.
Right.
You can get transonic, but couldn't get supersonic.
Was there some evil handling characteristics as you approached?
Oh, that was a wonderful airplane. Absolutely wonderful airplane. Very sensitive controls. I mean, it was super sensitive.
And how many hours did you end up with it?
Well, in 2 years, I probably got, let me see, I must have gotten 1,000 hours or something like that, 800, 900, 1,000 hours. I had made a cruise on the Bon Armour Shard, and you know, there's always has been and always will be in the U.S. Navy a Bon Armour Shard, because that was John Paul Jones's flagship. And the Bon Armour Shard at that time was an Essex-class carrier that had been converted to an angle deck. It still had a wooden flight deck, but we made a cruise.
So the difference between that and F-86 is it had a longer strut, landing gear in the front, so it sat on an angle.
Yeah, it did have a little bit longer nose strut, but of course it's built a little bit stronger because of the stresses of operating off the carrier. Mm-hmm. But and it had a J65, which I think the F-86H did. I can't remember what model, but I mean it was comparable to an F-86H, I think.
Yeah, I want to talk to you more about the launching off the carrier.
Okay.
In a little bit.
Oh yeah.
So then, now were you out of the cockpit for a while before you got into the F-8 then?
No. What happened was we came back. I mean, it was Paul Pugh was the skipper. The executive officer was a guy by the name of Donald Cook Red Dog Davis, who was one of the most colorful people I've ever run across. And you know, we JOs, we nuggets, there were a bunch of us in the squadron. We thought that's what the Navy was like. You know, we thought everybody in the Navy was like that. And it turned out we had two of the most outstanding officers, leaders, and pilots in the Navy. At least that was our humble opinion. And I mean, Paul made Rear Admiral, which was remarkable because he had a tendency to be a little. I spoke at his memorial service over here at Fort Rosecrans because I got to know his boys and his daughter and his wife. I named my daughter after Paul's wife, Clarine. My daughter's name is Clarine. Anyway, I said, and Fred Hazlett, who I had mentioned before, who I went, you know, we'd spent all the time in the squadron together. I said, Paul did not suffer fools gladly. And Fred piped up and he said, that's not quite correct. Paul did not suffer fools, period. Regardless of rank. And so he.
So how did he ever make admiral?
Well, I mean, he told me a couple of times, he said, I'll never make admiral. But he did. And Red Dog made 4 stars. Red Dog was went all the way.
Let me back up a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell me about your first solo flight.
First solo flight in an SNJ. T6 to you Air Force people.
Yeah.
In fact, on the Midway, there's a SNJ on the hangar deck. Have you been to the Midway? Have you been?
Yeah, once.
Yeah, well, part of the deal was we caracoled. The only carrier landings I had before I got my wings were 6 carrier landings in an SNJ. And I can't remember the name. I've got my logbook at home, and I can look it up to find out what the name of the carrier was, but it was a straight deck carrier. Mm-hmm. And we were flying out of Barron Field, Alabama, which is part of the complex down there. It's just a little bit west of Pensacola. And, you know, you go through field carrier landing practice and all this kind of stuff and learn how to make a carrier approach and follow the signals of the LSO with the paddles and all this kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And you get field qualified, and then you go out on the out in the Gulf of Mexico and launch yourself at the deck. And I look back now, and I'm trying to remember what the speed was, but it was about 68 knots or 70 knots, something like that. And you got some wind down the deck, so I mean, it's, you know, your closure rate is not very high. It's, you know. And but I'll tell you talk about excited, and I did fine, except on my 3rd landing, I came down. I mean, I was a little bit right gear low, and I landed a little hard. And it blew the right tire. And I said, oh God, I'm in trouble now. But there's this, the flight deck bosun is there. He's giving me to hold your brakes, and out, and the engine's still running and the propeller's still turning, and I'm just stopped right there in the deck, because what you normally do is, when you're going through the deck in an SNJ, you catch a wire, and they disengage the wire, and then he gives you a 2-finger turn up, and you just take off again. And it was a straight deck carrier. Well, anyway, while I'm holding the brakes here, out of the catwalk comes a guy with a wheel assembly, followed by a guy with a speed wrench, followed by a third guy that looks like he could play linebacker for the Green Bay Packers. And he runs up and he puts his back under the right wingtip, and he raises up and raises the airplane. And that sounds like it might not be possible, but there's a lot of leverage from the wingtip to the,
Yeah.
And he raises the blown tire wheel up off the deck. Guy goes in there with a speed wrench, takes that, puts the other one. Guy gives me a 2-finger turn up, I'm back in the air, and I swear to God it didn't take more than a minute. So
I think everybody has a great first solo story.
well, that's the first carrier landing story, the first solo story. I remember that. Of course, you remember these things. But my first solo story was not remarkable. I mean, my instructor says, "Okay, you're ready to solo." We land at an outlying field outside of Pensacola. It's not. There's a windsock there, but there's no tower or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And he gets out and he locks the straps together in the back seat. He says, "Okay, go ahead and take off in that direction, come back around and shoot a couple of touch and goes, and then on the third landing, stop and pick me up." And that's what I did.
So anyway, let's go from the FJ3. So did the squadron just switch over to F8s? Is that what happened?
We deployed on the Midway in August of '58. And incidentally, let me add something here. We got back from the Bonhomme Richard cruise in FJs in '57, in the spring of '57. And I think it was in June of '57 we got our first FAUs. Paul Pugh, Red Dog Davis, Jim Stockdale had come to the squadron from, do you know who Jim Stockdale is?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Had come to the squadron after we got back from the Bonhomme Richard cruise in FJ3s. And we had some other people coming to the squadron that had very little jet time, including Jim Stockdale. He was an instructor at the test pilot school in Patuxent River, and he had come to Patuxent to test pilot school from a ASW squadron, a Stoof, prop-driven airplane. And so we hung on to about 8 FJs to give these people some extra jet time. I mean, to build up the jet time. And I was assigned as the section leader, Flight of 4, second section leader, for Jim Stockdale. And I was told, teach him how to fly tactics. Because I had gotten, I'd gotten pretty good at it. So.
But he outranked you.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, I loved him like a father, and his wife Sybil, who's still alive. I mean, they're just just family. They're terrific people, absolutely terrific people. Yeah. And he had a terrific sense of humor, smart as they come.
Brave man.
Guy. But anyway, and so we flew, and so he was fourth in the seniority, and of course red, white, and blue. We used the colors for flights. Red, white, and blue flight were taken by the CO, XO, and the ops officer.
Yes.
And Jim was the maintenance officer, so he was green. So he was green 1, I was green 3. Anyway, so then we deploy in the Crusader. We had some problems.
Well, you must have flown it first, what, out of Miramar or someplace or other to get.
We were stationed at Moffett Field at that time.
Well, so you get checked out.
We got the F-8s at Moffett Field.
So what was your first flight in one of those things? I mean, they didn't have two-seaters.
No, there was no two-seater.
So what was that like the first flight?
Well, after flying the FJ3, I'll tell you that when this was a universal experience. You know, when you if you'd been flying the FJ3, you hopped into an F8 and you took off. I think we made military takeoffs to begin with.
Really?
I mean, you know, you could you were accelerated very quickly in burner, and they didn't want somebody to get, you know.
No, but you're using up so
going
much
fast
runway.
and
You're running up so much
stripping
runway,
some
though.
gear doors and all that kind of stuff. Oh no, you did it.
When you picked the F8 up.
It would leap into the F8 would leap into the air. I mean, it's such a clean airplane anyway.
Yeah.
It would leap into the air quite efficiently in military power without afterburner. But
Which engine did the F8 have in it?
what kind of what?
Which engine was it?
Oh, it's a J57. And the later models were putting out about 18,000, 18,500 in burner.
Oh, wow.
And it was a 17,000 pound airplane. The empty, the A model, 17.5 or something like that. And 10,000 pounds of.
So was it made just as an interceptor to protect the fleet?
This
that
was
what
a fighter. It was built as a fighter.
Right.
Really as a gunfighter. With, you know, with the, and including the Sidewinder missile.
So you had a couple of 20 millimeters as well?
Four.
Oh, boy.
4 20 millimeters. And they put fuselage pylons. This thing is configured pretty much as the C model was when I was flying.
Now, why did they put them on the fuselage rather than the wings?
Well, they didn't have any wing stations. Later in the game, in Vietnam, they put wing stations on. They did put wing stations. You could carry a 2,000 pound bomb on each wing. But I don't. I guess I think you could probably carry Zunis too, Zuni pods.
Mm-hmm.
But the missiles, I believe, were pretty exclusively launched from the.
Did you fire many of the missiles on it?
I say that.
Did you fire many of the Sidewinders with it?
Oh, well, yes, I did. I mean, we had a cruise that we made on the Constellation in F-8s after I spent a tour of duty as an instructor in the F-124, and after that I went back to a fleet squadron as the ops officer and made a cruise on the Constellation, USS Constellation.
What years was that?
That would be 63. And
so just as things
that was peacetime, and our air wing, our CAG, I'm trying to remember, I think it was Bob Gallatin, and we put together an air show off the ship, and it was a terrific air show. In fact, we launched 4 F-8s at the outset when we began the launch. We would the Con A had 4 catapults, 4 steam catapults, 2 on the 2 on the angle deck and 2 on the bow. And ordinarily there's an interlock between the cats where you can't launch the bow cats simultaneously because they're towed in, so that's bad news. But what they did is they took out the interlocks and they didn't launch them simultaneously, but what we would do is we'd launch 4 F-8s, all of them going off within a matter of seconds of one another, joined up in a diamond coming off the bow with the wing up, gear up, bring the wing up, bring the gear up, and we'd be settled into a diamond at fairly slow airspeed, with the wing up at about 250, and climb a little bit, and then put the wing down, and just keep doing a 360 and come back in a diamond by the ship, and it was.
Wow.
It was a thing of beauty.
Oh yeah, sounds like it.
But on that same flight, my wingman Dick Pascal and I would shoot sidewinders at a parachute flare.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think it was an A4 go by about off the stern quarter and drop a parachute flare. We'd come from the other direction and come in formation and each shoot a sidewinder at. There were 2 parachute flares. Each shoot a sidewinder at a parachute flare, and so that's just part of the air show. So I ended up shooting a lot of sidewinders.
Oh, wow. That must have made a hell of a noise when it went off right next to your ear there,
It's
basically.
not that bad. But back to when I first leapt in the air in an F-8, I said the controls pressures were much heavier than I was used to in an FJ3. I mean, this, talk about a sensitive airplane, but you get used to that.
Yeah.
I mean, as you know, just
Yeah,
like
sure.
everything. And it's kind of like getting in a new car, and things are in a little bit different position, and you get used to it. It was different, and it's the difference between driving a Maserati and a Cadillac. Is kind of the way that's the way I would equate it.
So now let's skip forward. So let's just compare it directly with the F4. Because that was your next, so you flew that for 8 years, and then you went and did you go directly into the F4 from that?
Yeah, and the reason I got into the F4 is I was, in '64, I had orders to the Bureau of Naval Personnel in officer distribution. And so I went to Bupers, and I delayed my departure to Bupers by a month because we got involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident, and on the 2nd of August, it was the first Gulf of Tonkin incident, and it was a Sunday afternoon. We were operating on Yankee Station, or what became known as Yankee Station, and we were, at that time, we F-8s were escorting photo airplanes making photo missions over Laos. And there was a group of 4 F-8s and either 6 or 8 A4s that were scheduled for Sunday, one launch and recovery, to practice a contingency strike on a maybe bridge up in Laos. That's all we knew. And we're going to go launch at a smoke light off the Ticonderoga. We were flying off the Ticonderoga. Well, and so I was in VF-53, and my exec was Robert Morhard. Robert and I took off, flight of 2. Jim Stockdale and his wingman Hastings took off from 51. Jim was the skipper of VF-51 at that time. And we went up, and we joined up as a flight of 4. And this is going to be a 1-hour mission. Ordinarily, it's an hour and a half cycle of time on the carrier. So we were up just yoinking around before we went down to do some strafing on this smoke light. And we got a call on the radio, shift to another channel. We did, and we were vectored north because PT boats were attacking the carrier Maddox at the northern end of the Gulf of Tonkin, 320 miles up the pike. And Jim, of course, was Jim Stockdale was the senior guy, so we go up there, and we arrive on scene, and of course, and it's obvious that the Maddox is up there solo. They're up there by themselves. And you could tell from the way the sea was all broiled up that they had been doing some heavy maneuvering. And we see 3 PT boats headed back for those karst islands that are up in the northern end of the Gulf of Tonkin. 2 of them are running fairly close together. In the lead, about a mile behind, is a single. And they're hauling mail. And so Jim says, Hastings and I will take the 2 up forward. Robert, you guys take the trailing boat. So we did. Now, let me go back and talk about 1960 when I was an instructor in BF-124, the F-8 rag. They shut down FAGU, the Fleet Air Gunnery Unit, in El Centro in late 59 or early 60. And that was the only fighter weapons training, the only organized fighter weapons training in the Navy. And they decommissioned the school. And of course, we're the fighter training business in 124, that we're the F-8 rag. And so, I'm trying to remember who the skipper of 124 is. I think it may have been Vince Kelly. In any event, a couple of us said, you know, we'd heard about the fighter weapons school at Nellis, Air Force Fighter Weapons School.
Did it start that early?
Oh, hell yes.
Okay.
I know because I went to the 50th reunion up in Vegas not too many years ago.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, and at that time, the school was set up for 12 students, and they were, you know, from wings. They were wing representatives that were there to become wing weapons training officers. They go back to the wing and teach all the squadron pilots and so on. And so the Navy in the Pentagon walked across the hall and said, "Hey, we'd like to can we get a billet to one of the weapons school classes?" And it happened, and I got to go. And so I went. The reason I made the comment about Williams Air Force Base, Willie, that's where I went to get. They flew F-100s up there at that time, and there's not. I mean, it's the same engine between the F-100 and the F-8, except the aerodynamic characteristics of the two airplanes are a little different. But I mean, you know, it's not that big a deal. And so they gave me a. When I got to Willie. The operational flight trainer are the things you get into, you know, like they had just shut it down, but they said, "Don't worry about it. Here's the, what'd you call it, the -6 or something like that?"
-1.
The -1. Here's the -1. We call it the flight handbook. Now it's the NATOPS manual. Read it, and you get your first flight in an F model, you know, tomorrow morning. Okay, fine. So off we go. And I'm in the front seat of this F roaring down the runway, and I get into the air, and I was in a constant neat, because it's back to this control system.
Oh, right.
When they built the F-100, the Air Force insisted that it had the same control response the F-86 did.
Right.
And as I told you, with the F-8, it felt like a truck to begin with.
Yeah.
But anyway, I finally readjusted to it, and I got I think I got 12 hours or something at Willie, and then went up to Nellis, and it was from what, late September, October, November, December, and I was #1 academically, #2 in conventional weapons, and about 5 in nuclear weapons, because that was all new to me. But if I recall correctly, I never missed an answer on any of the academic questions. And anyway, I was selected as the outstanding student of the class. And I learned how to strafe, let me tell you. I figured that one out with some good training and all that. And so now we're back to the Gulf of Tonkin. And quite frankly, only because I had been trained on how to air-to-ground strafe, that I made a quick decision. I said, you know, I don't want to go after these PT boats from the stern to the bow, because if I'm going on the course they're going, all I got to do is turn to screw up my solution, right? So if I go at them from the side, there's nothing they can do.
Well,
and they can't maneuver out, you know.
yeah, right.
So I can set up and try to judge it properly so that they fly into my sights at the right.
Stop them on the canopy.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
And of course, I mean, the F-8, we had a gun sight that told us what we're doing anyway. So, so I came down and started firing, and I started impacting the water just ahead of the bow, and it worked on the bow, and then I was able to, you know, to keep it on, and I just covered that boat with flashes, HEI going like that, and I almost hit the boat. I was so fascinated with what I was doing that it was that kind of a pull off, and stopped him dead in the water. And they threw something over the side, or something got knocked over the side. It was like a yellow dye marker or something like that. And then we had to leave because we were low on gas. And so I'd like to think that it sunk. I didn't see it sink. But the record of that incident is the beginning of Jim Sybil Stockdale's book, In Love and War. Have you ever read that book? Mm-hmm. Well, get it. And Jim starts out talking about the Gulf of Tonkin incident.
Mm-hmm. So there was just one PT boat that was shot up?
Well, they hit the other ones too,
okay.
But it was with, you know, raking fire, not the concentrated fire.
So you didn't get to put a PT boat on your canopy, huh?
No, but you know, hey, it's, the most important thing is that I know what I did.
I guess I just didn't know. I didn't realize there was any retaliation for the torpedo attack. I didn't realize that it happened that fast.
What happened was, I think the retaliatory strikes were perfectly justified because, at least from what we knew at the time,
right.
Because the Maddox, when we were up there, they were not threatening anything, but of course they had a van sitting on the deck there that they had the people in there listening to the radars and the communications and all that kind of stuff. But you know, they claim a 12-mile limit internationally and all that sort of thing, and I don't think that the Maddox was inside the 12-mile limit up there. I mean, you know, and it's fairly serious to go charging out there and attack. I didn't understand at the time the mentality of a destroyer sailor.
And what mentality is that?
Well, the thing is, if a destroyer gets hit by a torpedo, it's curtains.
Yeah.
I mean, you could be down in 15 seconds. Take the whole thing down. So, you know, they get very nervous when you have torpedoes launched at you with every good justification.
And just the fact that the PT boats were out there was intimidating enough.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, so let's go to the F4. I mean,
okay.
Tell me about flying the F4. What was that like for you?
It wasn't as much fun to fly as the F8, but I will say about the F4, other than the FJ3, I thought the FJ3 was the easiest airplane to bring aboard ship at least the easiest jet to bring aboard ship that I ever flew.
What was the approach speed for the carrier?
With an FJ3, I think it was about 125 knots.
And on the F8?
135, and 135 for the F4. But of course, you got 30 knots of wind on the deck, so your speed in relation to the flight deck is about 105.
But didn't that boundary layer control on the F4 as you gas the throttles back and forth really change the pitch a lot, or did you kind of hold them steady all the way down?
Well, you being a pilot, no, and you've flown the F4, so you know what I'm talking about when I talk about bringing an airplane aboard ship. And we had slotted stabilators, so you could. I've actually flown this thing aboard ship at about 125 knots with a slotted stabulator.
And we didn't have, the D model didn't have that. I flew the Ds,
Oh, okay.
and we didn't have that.
But anyway, with the BLC and the slotted stabulator, but most importantly with the J79 engine, that thing, you had so much control in this airplane, plus the fact that, well, I'll compare it. First of all, if you got into trouble coming aboard ship in an F4, you weren't paying any attention at all, because you could add throttle and arrest a sink rate just like that.
Yeah, yeah.
You know that from flying the F4.
Oh yeah, that's great.
And the best carrier airplane from that standpoint, as far as having control of it and not getting in a position you couldn't get out of, the best I ever flew. And it was a good stable airplane to bring aboard ship.
Mm-hmm.
Probably one of the best. And it had all that power, plus the fact the geometry of the engines, and when the F4 is just sitting on the deck, the engines are canted down.
Right.
And when you're cocked up in an approach, you're getting some significant lift out of thrust there.
Yeah.
Plus the response of the engines, it was absolutely wonderful. The Crusader, unfortunately, the J57 was a wonderful engine, except it was slow to accelerate because it was a twin spool engine. You had a compressor section and a turbine floating on another compressor section, another compressor and another turbine section outside of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a twin spool engine. And that was good for fuel efficiency, for fuel consumption, but it was bad for engine acceleration. And one of the problems with an F8, you think that the wing goes up, it's variable instance wing, but what really happens is the fuselage goes down. So the pilot can see where the hell he's going. Well, what does that do to the thrust line, you see?
Yeah.
So the thrust line of the engine is almost directly lined up with the flight path. So when you add power, do you arrest a sink rate? Hell no. You accelerate. So you can't control your altitude with power and your airspeed with nose attitude in an F8 only. You have to do both all the time. In an F4, you can hang it on power, and you can, the carrier approach is a constant attitude approach all the way.
Did you just fly the lights, whatever they're called?
Well, it's an angle of attack.
Angle of attack, yeah. But we had the zero
the
and the 2B.
Yeah, you got the upper V and the donut and the lower V.
So you just put it on.
That was green, that was yellow, and that was red.
So did you just put it on the wrong side?
Put it on the donut. Yeah. Well, we had even in the F8, we had the E model. We had what's called a auto throttle that was tied to the angle of attack system. So if you get set up properly, all you got to do is worry about nose attitude, because the power would automatically adjust to maintain the proper angle of attack.
Did you ever really use it?
Well, the auto throttle?
Yeah.
Oh, I use it all the time.
Oh, did you really? Oh, okay.
I mean,
That'd be the kind
it's
of
not
thing
autopilot, it's just auto throttle.
Yeah.
That's all. All it does is it adjusts the power to accomplish the proper airspeed.
Yeah.
As reflected by, to keep the donut centered. I mean, keep the
vertical
donut
velocity
little
indicator.
angle of attack indexer.
Angle of attack indicator. AOA, yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So let's go down to carrier operations. The landing to me is fairly straightforward, but since you talk about as your docent duties on the midway, what do you tell people about the launch? In fact, why don't I kind of stop this right here and put in the other tape?
Okay.
I very carefully set it down here so I know what I did with it. Now I can't find it. What did I do with it?
I wonder it's on my lap. Okay, I'm on the video. I don't know.
Okay.
Let me go get a glass of water here.
That's a good idea. Okay, stop. Carrier landings.
Carrier
takeoffs.
Catapults.
Catapults.
The steam catapult is one of the innovations for which we can be grateful to the British.
Really?
As is, oh yes, that's a British innovation. As is the angled deck carrier.
Wow.
They call it the canted deck, but those were, and the use of the Fresnel lens for the optical landing device. Because when I had made a cruise on the Midway in 1958, we had an optical landing system that used a mirror. It was a mirror there with a light source, and the function was kind of the same. It projected about a 3.5 degree glide slope, and you followed that glide slope down to get your proper rate of descent, your angle of descent.
So when they were using it, they called it the meatball, right?
Yeah.
So when they were using that, do you still pay attention to the LSO, or do you kind of look at both?
You don't. You do not. Are we running right now?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. The LSO is back on the LSO platform, and he is not giving you instructions. I mean, if you're flying a proper pass, you're not going to hear a word from him. There are three things that the pilot needs to know, or there are three issues that he has to resolve in the carrier approach. One is the glide slope information, and that's what the Fresnel lens provides. Do you know what a Fresnel lens is?
Yeah, yes I do. Use them in lighthouses.
Yeah, it was designed by some Frenchman back in the late 1800s to put on the top of lighthouses.
Sure.
So it's a focus beam, and it rotates, and the captain of the ship out there can see, okay, how many times did that go by this minute? And if it goes 8 times, then, that's the Schmidlap Point lighthouse.
Right.
Well, for the use to provide the glide slope information for a carrier approach, the Fresnel lens, there are 5 lenses stacked up. Okay. The middle lens that's what you want. That's the meatball.
Mm-hmm.
And the middle lens is lined up with some datum lights, a row of green lights that goes out on each side. And when you're on that middle lens, the meatball is lined up with the datum lights. If you go up to where you're a little bit above that center lens, boop, up goes the meatball, and it'll be one ball. The ball will be sitting on top of the datum lines. Mm-hmm. And if you go up 2, it'll go up that far. And if it goes up any further, it goes off the top and you lose it. Mm-hmm. That means you're up at probably 4.5 degrees or something like that.
No, it's offset. So you're going to lose it at some point, but is it?
Because it is, the Fresnel lens is a narrow beam in the vertical only. And it is 18 inches deep at the ramp, and it's 27 feet deep at 3/4 of a mile. So you've got, 27 feet. Mm-hmm. As you get closer, it gets narrower and narrower.
Right.
But it goes out at least 50 degrees or so on each side. So that when you're at about the 45, and you're turned in, you can see the meatball.
But as you're approaching the deck, though, when you get right down within going over the top of the deck, you pretty much lost it.
Well,
just peripheral vision. But
it is the peripheral vision aspect is insignificant. You fly that meatball all the way to touchdown.
Really?
Because if you do not, there is a tendency for pilots, inexperienced pilots or pilots in extremis, that is to say, you're really hot to get aboard, to spot the deck. That's when people start hitting the ramp. The hook to eye distance, I think, in a Phantom is 18 feet. That is to say, where the pilot's eye is to the hook point is 18 feet. On the midway, you want, for every aircraft that comes aboard, you want to have 12 feet hook to ramp clearance. That is to say, if he's got the ball centered, his hook point is going to cross the ramp 12 feet high, 12 feet above the ramp.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that for every, and the hook to eye distance is different for every type of aircraft. So you have to make an adjustment in the Fresnel lens, like that, to adjust for the hook and eye clearance.
So they change it from an F8 to an F4 to an A4. They move it.
That's right.
So that's why they have to know. Now taking off, it's kind of the same way. They have to know.
Taking off, you don't give a shit.
No, I mean, but you have to adjust the weight for the pin that breaks under the burner and the.
No, as to the pin. Well, first of all, the whole back bar and the dog bone, what we call the dog bone, which is the thing that breaks under the power of the catapult, is different for every type of aircraft. In other words, the dog bone and whole back bar for an A7 will not fit on any other airplane.
Okay.
Has to make it sailor proof. You cannot launch an airplane, the wrong airplane with the wrong gear.
But if you have an airplane that's an F4 fully grossed out with guns and bombs, and then you take off when it's clean, you better have your weight adjusted different for the stroke of the catapult.
One of the inputs into the, to set the steam catapult, you need to know what the weight of this aircraft
right,
is.
there you go. Right.
That's one of the deals.
Okay, so go through the procedure now. You're the pilot, you're in the cockpit, and you've just pulled up to the catapult.
Okay, well, the first thing is that the aircraft that are on the flight deck, anything that's even close to being modern, they don't no longer launch with bridles. I mean, the F4 launched with bridles. This is a separate piece of gear that connected the aircraft to the shuttle, that is to say, the business end of the catapult. And the midway, if you noticed, on the bow there are two horns that go off the bow. They extend down about 20 degrees. Those horns were there to retrieve the bridles from the aircraft.
Oh, I see.
Now, you look at the current aircraft carriers, all of which are nuclear powered. Every aircraft carrier we have in commission is either the 10 of them are Nimitz class, and one of them is the Enterprise, which has been around for a long time. But they don't have horns on the bow. You can't launch a bridle airplane off of those. Well, you could do it, but you're going to lose the bridle. It's going to go.
Yeah.
You're not going to retrieve it. But now all the carrier airplanes have got what is called a nose launch bar, which is part of the nose gear. And it's in front of the nose strut, and normally it sits there. This is the underlying fuselage, and normally it's up parallel to the fuselage. But when you taxi up onto the catapult, and you've got a catapult director that's telling you, bringing you up, right down the center line, about 15 or 20 feet short of the shuttle, he's going to give you a stop, lower the nose launch bar. And there's a switch in the cockpit, you go like that, down comes the nose launch bar. The front of the nose launch bar fits into a track that's behind where the shuttle sits on the catapult center line there. And what that does is it makes sure that it steers the nose, keeps the nose gear straight ahead. That nose launch bar rides up over the shuttle, falls over in front of the shuttle. In the meantime, there's this catapult crewman. He's watching that happen, and he also connects up the whole back. The whole back has got, in the front of it, it's got this dog bone. The back part of the dog bone fits into the whole back bar. the front part fits into a slot that's between the two nose wheels on, I think the F4 has got a two-wheel nose gear. Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
And so does the A7, which is where we give the cat tops. And then the back of the nose of the holdback bar fits into a slot in the catapult track there. And it says for A7. If it's an A7, you put that thing into the slot that says A7. Now you're in a condition here where you haven't tensioned up the catapult yet. The deck edge operator who stands in the catwalk, off to the left, up forward, he's looking at a console. He's got to cover up on a console, and he's got about 15 buttons on this console. And he's the guy that actually fires the catapult. The upper right-hand one says, "Fire!" But he can run a little hydraulic system that'll move that shuttle forward and aft. So when it comes time to tension the catapult, and he's given that signal by the guy that's underneath the nose gear who connects up the holdback bar and sees to it that the nose launch bar is properly sitting in front of the shuttle. The front of the shuttle has got a notch in it, and the nose launch bar has got two tits that stick out on the side, and those two tits go in and lock themselves into that the slot that's in front of the shuttle. When he gets the thing hooked up to the holdback system, then he gives a signal like that to the deck edge operator. The deck edge operator uses the hydraulic system to tension up the catapult. And you can feel, if you're sitting in the cockpit, you can feel tension being taken. I mean, you're just a little squat there, and you can see it too if you're standing right there. So now you are in tension, feet on the deck, and at that point you run up to full power. You got a two-finger turn up from the catapult director. He passes your attention to the cat officer who's right in the middle of the deck, up on the bow there. Two-finger turn up, come up to full power.
Burner?
Huh?
Burner?
If he wants burner, he's going to give you burner. You would know beforehand if you're going to make a burner shot. Yeah.
So in other words, you don't usually?
Not necessarily.
Oh, really? Wow.
In combat, if you're carrying a whole bunch of crap, you're in an F4. I mean, I've made some burner cat shots in F4s that were dillies because, you'll be using burner, but you don't. It's not all the time.
Oh, really?
And we didn't launch in burner very often in the Crusader.
Really? But I guess if things starts to sink, you always have burner to get out of trouble.
Well,
maybe not in the F8 so much, but the F4 certainly.
Oh yeah. Well, again, it depends on your loading as to whether you're going to be using burner. But anyway,
well, I shouldn't be talking.
You go up to full power. The pilot checks to make sure everything's, his temperature okay, things are up to speed, blah blah blah. When he's ready to go, he salutes the cat officer. The cat officer returns the salute. The cat officer checks underneath the airplane to make sure that nobody's still around underneath there. Looks up in the bow, make sure it's clear up there. If the deck is pitching, you've got a rising and falling bow. The cat officer is going to wait until the bow is starting to come back up before he gives the launch signal. You don't want to be launching someone as the bow is going down.
Yeah.
And then he delivers the launch signal, which is down on one knee and arm forward, touching the flight deck. And it's not official until he touches the flight deck with his hand. Now, all this time, after this deck edge operator has taken tension, tensioned up the catapult, from that point on, the deck edge operator's got his hands in the air to let everybody know, because everybody knows that the guy's going to punch the fire button. And as long as he's got his hands in the air, he can't punch the fire button. And when he gets the official launch signal from the catapult officer, that's when he drops his hands and punches the fire button. And at about 3/4 of a second, they vent steam in behind these two pistons that are driving these 12-foot long big pistons in these 18-inch diameter cylinders that run the length of the catapult, 240 feet on the midway, 0 to 165 knots in about a little less than 3 seconds.
How many G's is that?
It's probably 2.5 to 3, maybe.
So it's not painful. It's just.
Oh no. But it's vigorous. I mean,
Now what? Well, first of all, the launch officer, the guy on the deck, he puts his hand down to the deck.
yeah.
Now, is the actual signal when he touches it or when he pulls it away?
No, when he touched it.
When he touches it.
Yeah. That it's not official. That the way it always was when I was launching off the
You
ship.
know, I just remember hearing somebody say he touches it, but as soon as he pulls it, that's when they push the button. So
Well,
all you knew is you were getting ready.
I knew. I mean, I knew that that they have to touch the deck in
Yeah.
order for it to be official, and then they just stay in that position. They bring their hand back up and stay in that position.
Yeah, I talked to
Cat
one.
fires.
I talked to one of the kids that was going to the school. I was playing golf with him one day, and he was at Miramar someplace, and I said, "You guys practice that in the privacy of your own room, don't you?" He said, "Yeah, we do."
Oh, going through cat school.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, you got to make it look good,
Yeah, that's right.
So, did you go full back stick on the F4 when you take off?
Well, the problem with the F4 is that the center of gravity of the airplane shifted quite a bit depending on what you were carrying and where you were carrying it. You carried a lot of stuff on the wing stations, so you had to be familiar with what, under some configurations there would be a tendency for the airplane to rotate off the cap. In others, it would tend, the nose would want to try to go down. So you had to be aware of what your feedback was going to be based on what you were carrying and where you were carrying.
Yeah, the Air Force F4, you were supposed to go full back stick, and as you roll down the runway, then you catch the nose. But in 3 seconds or so you're in the cat, it's probably pretty hard to do that, so you better be ready to adjust immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I don't.
It always seemed kind of silly to me to just start, I don't know.
Well, I don't.
We did it, but
I don't think you'd start with a stick. Well, I can tell you that the F-8 was one of the best catapulting airplanes I have ever flown, if not the best. I mean, you set what I think it was 2.5 or 3.5 degrees of up trim. You had a rolling trim wheel. It wasn't one of these beep 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 beep.
Yeah.
You want to set 3.5 degrees, you go. There it is, 3.5 degrees.
Wow. I wonder what
And that airplane went off the bow just the way it was sitting on the catapult. Just never varied.
When did they decommission the F-8 anyway?
Well, they were still flying on the Vietnam War. I know that.
I just thought they were such beautiful airplanes.
Oh, it is. It's a gorgeous airplane.
Yeah. But then they kind of ruined it, cutting the middle out of it.
Well,
some people say.
I'll tell you, when I went to the fighter weapons school, there was a major up there who was the operations officer of the fighter weapons school. His name was Wilbur Creech. Bill Creech. And he subsequently became the commander of TAC, and probably is as responsible for the F-16 as any airplane. I mean, as any guy around. One of the people that was responsible for it. He passed away about 3 or 4 or 5 years ago. But he was a smart guy. But anyway, when I went to the fighter weapons school, that was when Curtis P. LeMay was held sway over the Air Force, and the commander at Nellis was a SAC guy. The brigadier general that was commander of Nellis was a SAC guy. And they were instituting SAC maintenance, which is called 66-1, centralized maintenance. And there were, I can't remember, 2 or 3 F-100 training squadrons at Nellis, plus the fighter weapons school that relied on those airplanes, And the last 3 weeks of the syllabus up there, they had to shut down all F-100 training at Nellis in order to provide 8 airplanes a day for the fighter weapons school. And some days they didn't even give us 8 airplanes. And boy, I'll tell you, I remember we were at some parties, Bill Creech said, boy, if I ever get my hands on this outfit, this will never happen again. And it didn't. I mean, I think it'd be safe to say that there's been a string of 6 or 7 Air Force chiefs of staff that were all hand-picked by Wilbur Creech.
Well, let me ask some other questions related to the F-4. So your backseater, Jack Rawlins, were you crewed with him the whole time that you were on the carrier?
I joined I joined the F-114 when it was deployed. I replaced a guy by the name of John Rademacher, who was a contemporary. He was a nugget going to Air Wing 21 the same time I went to the F-211, in the summer of 1955. But John had a bad back, and so he had to come back to the States. He couldn't fly anymore. And Jack Rawlins was what's called the Bull RO. He was the lead radar intercept officer in the squadron. And I went out there with a young ensign by the name of Jim Lang, who went through the F-121 at the same time I did and flew in my back seat on several occasions. And we went out to join the F-114 as a crew, and Jim flew in my back seat to begin with out there. And we shot down a MiG on the 24th of April.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Shot down a MiG-17, and
tell me about that.
Well, it was a raid on Kep and
a what? A raid on Kep. Okay.
Raid on Kep Airfield up north, and we got involved with some MiGs, and Denny Wisely got a MiG that day also, a member of the squadron, and we think that Denny was shooting down a MiG that was trying to shoot me down. And, I don't doubt that for a moment, because he came up, he didn't know who this MiG was shooting at, but it was probably me, because he came up in the air and said, "Linfield, pull up!" And of course all the Linfields, there are about 4 of us up there, pulled up and did a high G barrel roll and all that. Mm-hmm. Well, I pulled up, did a high G barrel roll, and looked out here, and there goes an atoll motoring by. But anyway, we had Jimmy and I had a MiG in sight, and we shot a A9C or A9D, one of the more advanced versions of the Sidewinder, and it hit him on the wing joint there. I mean, we saw the flash, and we didn't see it hit the ground, but he was trailing, he was trailing smoke. And what happened is we picked up we must have picked up some flak or something like that, because I didn't use burner much, so I didn't run out of fuel using burner, but I was losing fuel. And we got our way out back over the water. We got over the Karst Islands, and the port engine flamed out, and then the starboard engine flamed out. We were at a couple thousand feet.
Oh, right.
And we punched out.
That's right. You punched out twice, didn't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we punched out and got rescued by the Northern Star Destroyer. Helicopter came, picked us up, and we went back and went on the carrier, and we were flying the next day. But in the meantime, Jack Rawlins said, "Hey, come with me down to my stateroom." And Jack says, "I'm the lead RO of the squadron. I ought to be flying with you. You're the ops officer, and you're going to get the good flights."
All right. Well, did he want to do air-to-air more than anything else?
What's that?
Did he want to do more of the air-to-air missions, the fighter missions?
Well, Jack can do anything. I mean, Jack is a remarkable guy, and he's a real asset in the back seat, no question about that.
So it was okay with you to have a backseater?
Well, I wanted to make. I really enjoyed Jim Lang because he's such a. He's a Nuggets nugget. I mean, he was for a kid is about what he was about probably 22, something like that.
Mm.
Sharp as a tack.
Yeah.
Eager.
Well, did you ever fire a sparrow at anybody? Or did you guys have sparrows?
No, we never did fire a sparrow.
Yeah. They didn't work very well in those days anyway.
Well, actually, in those days they did not. I mean, don't get me started on the philosophy of, I went through this thing in the F8, where in the later models they put a more sophisticated radar in the nose. And did they continue to make it compatible with the air-to-air gun firing solution? The answer to that is no. And that part of it, well, I think a large part of it was because the requirement was never levied on the later radars were made by Magnavox. And my good friend Fred Winton and I, we were the Bobbsey twins in 124. We went back to Magnavox and spent some time talking to them about it, and they made some modifications and so forth. But the feedback was, Davey never told us they needed to have that.
Well, I know when I know about the sparrow, I fired 2 or 3 of them out over the Gulf of Tripoli, down at Willis, and a 5-mile tow target, 90-degree beam. It made a lot of noise and they went off, but it never hit anything. I don't know where the heck they went, but
Well,
the target glowed like it was the sun. You couldn't miss it, and you lock onto it.
well,
Never got a hit.
the problem, the Sparrow had a hydraulic system in it, which to me, I don't know if they didn't have any alternative, but the Sidewinder has a gas grain in it. And it doesn't generate anything until you fire it. And then it fires off this gas grain, and the gas pressure runs a generator, which provides the electricity, and it also provides the gas pressure to run the fins, the guidance fins, and all that kind of stuff. You don't have to worry about leakage.
Yeah. Well, I know.
But you sure do with a hydraulic system.
Well, I know the F4D had Falcons, and that was really worthless. And just reading General Olds' book, they had F4Cs when he first got there with Sidewinders, and then they got F4Ds with the Falcons, and they couldn't hit anything. So he told his maintenance guys to go out there and rearm these things and reconfigure them so they could carry sparrows. And of course, the Air Force went bananas, and he just said, "Screw it, I'm going to use these things." And all of a sudden, they could shoot down airplanes again. So, but
They're using sparrows?
sparrows, the Falcons didn't work.
Yeah.
They wouldn't lock on. They wouldn't. Whatever happened. I guess there was a couple second lead time before it would do anything, and it just did not work at all. And so he took them off and threw them all away. But reading his book is interesting. I'm sure he overemphasizes a few things. But
Well, yeah, I'd like to read that book. That sounds interesting. Yeah.
he did a lot of stuff. I mean, he was in he flew P-38s, P-51s. He had 11 and a half victories. He got back to the States, and I shouldn't be talking, but I'll tell you anyway. He was in the first P-80 squadron. And then flew F-86, didn't go to Korea. Commanded a few different things, and finally, 22 years later, commanded the 355th. And he was the guy that set together that big Bolo flight where they shot down 7 MiGs.
Oh, yeah, the missiles free.
Yeah, what they did is they impersonated 105s.
Yeah.
And they just came in and fly, and all the MiGs came up, and then they had guys waiting for them. I think the Navy flights were over some of the airfields for when the MiGs would return, if they returned. So,
well, the deal was, they had to coordinate that thing in advance because.
Well, that was about the time you were shot down. It was right in that same area.
I was shot down the 14th of May.
Yeah, it was right in that same area.
Well, it was about in that era. I know that
Yeah.
because, but it happened more than once too. There were a couple, at least 2, maybe 3 iterations of that.
Right.
But the requirement was you had to be able to go in there missiles free. Anything that appears,
Yeah.
you can shoot at it.
So, did you ever have any combat with the MiG-21? Because you did have combat with the MiG-17. And apparently the MiG-17 was just as rugged the adversary as the MiG-21, from what Olds was saying.
I think so, yeah. Well, it depends who's in the cockpit. I mean, MiG-17 with a good driver. I mean, you're not gonna outturn that sucker. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the one that I shot down, or that Jimmy and I shot down, was a MiG-17D, I think it was, because they had an afterburner on it. But it looked
really?
It looked to me like it was a sterno can. You know how a sterno can sits there and the flames kind of lick around and all that kind of stuff? That's what it looked like.
What's the one we have downstairs? Do you know? Is it a D model?
I think it is, yeah.
It's an Egyptian airplane, apparently.
Yeah.
So listen, you want to talk about the Linfield 201 flight?
It's what happened was, and it doesn't come out in the book. Jack Rollins has a different memory of the lead up to the flight than I do.
Okay.
And as time went on, I just kind of let that one slip by. But it's not really clear what the lead up to the flight was about. I mean, what the things that transpired in the book. But I've subsequently determined that, in fact, it came from another squadron mate who's a good friend of Jack's of mine, but he's retired here in San Diego, and his name is John Holm. John and I go back to 1957 or 58, or 58 or 59. He was about 3 years behind me, but he came to the F-8 Reg on the West Coast about the time I became an instructor there up at Moffett Field. And we've been friends and ever since. And he was in the squadron when I was shot down. And he remembers, my recollection was that the day that Jack and I were shot down, they had scheduled cyclical ops against the Hamrong Bridge. And Hank Halloran, the skipper of the squadron, lives here in San Diego. And he doesn't have as firm a memory as I do, but John Holm kept kind of a journal. And he remembers that, as I do, that Jack and I were on the third iteration of this mission against the Hamrong Bridge. And
how many were there total? About 80 or something like that? It
went on for years. But I mean, nobody had attacked the Hamrong Bridge for months.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And so the admirals, or I guess the admiral staff, decided, let's do cyclical. Let's go bomb the Hamrong Bridge.
Now, what does cyclical mean?
Well, the cycle on an aircraft carrier is an hour and a half.
Okay.
You launch, turn out of the wind. An hour and a half later, you turn back into the wind and launch the second launch, and about that time, the first launch is coming back to land. Okay, so a cycle is an hour and a half.
Right, I got
but cyclical ops against the Hamrong Bridge would be, for a period of repetitive cycles, we're going to go launch attacks on the Hamrong Bridge. Now, I think there was one scheduled to go after us, which would have been the fourth one, but the skipper led the first one, and we were just flak suppression.
So the bridge runs east-west, basically.
Well, I think
pretty much east-west.
Well, it runs pretty much east-west, but the Ma River, runs pretty much east-west. That's right.
Yeah.
And it kind of gets turned around.
So which direction were you coming in from?
Well, we were coming in from the northeast, descending from the northeast, going at the flak sites.
And so the Zuni is air to ground.
It's an unguided rocket. But let me back up a little bit and talk about cyclical ops on the Hamrong Bridge. Skipper goes in there on the first flight of the day. It was probably 10 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And, hardly a shot fired because nobody had been around there for a while. So they go in. John Holm led the F-4s on the second iteration, the flak suppressors. And it started to pick up a little bit. And so here's my theory, and I think it's valid. by this time in the war, Vietnamese who demonstrated that they were a little bit unsophisticated. They're not dumb by any stretch of the imagination, but they were not very sophisticated about carrier aviation and all that. But they by this time they'd figured out, and I'm being a little bit facetious here, that if the airplanes came from the water, if they came from the west, and the next flight was an hour and a half later and it came from the west, odds were pretty good that there might be another one in another hour and a half. And so, and we're on the third mission, right?
Jeez.
And we could walk on the flak. I mean, it was unfriendly. And what I am convinced that we got hit by flak, and I also ingested, I'm sure, some debris from my own Zuni rockets, because
What was the terrain elevation?
the what?
The terrain elevation versus how high were you pulled out?
Oh, well, when we pulled out, we're probably at 4,000, something like that. I mean, we're pretty.
And so the Zuni would explode, and that make sense.
No, they had no. The Zunis a Zuni pack carries 4 rounds.
Right.
They're 5 inches, 5-inch high velocity
Right.
aircraft rocket. Okay. And they are in pods, and they're in a tube.
Right.
And there are folding fins, 4 folding fins in the ass end of each of these Zunis. And they are designed that when it leaves the front of the tube, these 4 fins pop up like this, and they're made out of metal. And they had a history of occasionally keeping on going. Well, you start sucking that stuff down through an engine, and you're going to have some problems.
But both your engines went out.
Yeah,
Didn't one engine go first, and then it probably threw a blade through the other engine or something like that?
Well, that I don't think that's going to be the case. When we looked at the airplane up in Hanoi, it's very clear from getting back underneath, and you can see, especially the port engine, that there was obvious evidence of fire up there that ate through. I mean, there's a blanket, there's probably a titanium blanket or something that's protecting the engine bay where the burner cans are and all that, on the top of the airplane.
This is just
It just wiped out that blanket, and you could see holes, and you see the sky through the holes in the top of the fuselage.
Isn't that funny? 40 years later, you get to figure it out.
Well, but we suspected that all along anyway.
But I mean, it's confirmed 40 years later. Oh, that's what happened. Oh, that part.
Yeah. Well, anyway, all I know is that I at first thought I had a flame out. Well, it turned out I didn't have a flame out. I don't think the engine fire ever went out. The temperatures went 800, 900 degrees. Yeah. And I had no control of the engines. The problem with there's no emergency fuel control on those J-79s. Now, in a Crusader with a J-57 engine, there's a red toggle switch over here that you flip it, and you turn your fuel control into a direct connection with the throttle. Bypass everything, you pump fuel into regardless of what your temperatures are and anything else,
So you fire at about 4,000 feet. You're firing, and so by 3,000 feet or so,
Well, I'm probably firing between 5 and 4 or something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not going to get too much lower than that.
What do you have, 30?
But they have VT fuses. That is to say, it's a radio fuse that blows up a certain altitude above the ground, like 75 feet or something like that, and it's pretty deadly. I mean, it's designed specifically to let the AAA crews know that they better take cover if somebody's coming down and shooting those Zunis.
So were you shooting at one side of the bridge or the other?
We were, we knew where the flag sites were.
Yeah, so you just
we're picking out. I mean, there were 3 of us in the flight. So
did you roll in as a flight of 3 all at the same time and come down as the flight of 3?
We were not in a tight formation, but yeah, we're kind of going in the
It wasn't not in trailing necessarily.
No. No, you're not going to do that anyway. That's too dangerous.
Not with that, no.
You're not going to be shooting Zunis when you got people out in front of you, because there's, who knows which direction they're going to go. I mean,
They're just
unguided.
Cool.
Yeah.
That is pretty funny. Oh, so anyway, you picked up some flack or whatever. The engine's unwinding, and
Well, anyway, so we're, Jack and I decided pretty much ahead of time that we were not going to jump out at altitude, no matter what, because they'll shoot at you. So, but we were trying to make it back to the river. I mean, we did not have the energy in the airplane to get out to the coast, because we're probably 14 miles from the coast anyway.
Right.
But I was, we were trying to get back to the river, because we figured it's not like a river, it's like a big, where the airplane ended up landing is a tidal flat.
mm-hmm.
And, I mean, it can be up to 3/4 of a mile wide, this
Mm-hmm.
whole thing. And there's a levee on each side of the river. And so, but anyway, we tried to make it back to the river, and we almost did, but didn't quite. And,
Well, when you punched, you weren't.
well,
The airplane made it, but you didn't.
yeah. Well, I was obviously just about over the levee when I punched out, because I landed just on the other side of the levee, on the river side of the levee, in what was kind of like a banana orchard or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm pretty sure I think I may have taken a pee there when we were visiting the shoot down site. I think I may have taken a pee down in that area. But anyway.
Memorable.
I
moment.
finally got Jack, I had to holler at Jack, get out, Jack, get out, and he finally did.
But when you pull your handle, doesn't that eject the back seat
No.
first?
They did not have a command ejection system.
Yeah, they do for the Air Force. That's what we had. That back seat went first.
Well, they finally put a command ejection system in the F4, which you should have had from the outset.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just absolutely insane. But I had an agreement. I mean, Jack and I understood that the back seater gets out first.
Absolutely.
And I have absolutely no question about that. But the problem is that, that's not a satisfactory situation for going off the catapult, for example. You can't sit there and say, hey, get out, Jack, get out, because you burn up a half a second, and that make the difference between you're making it and not making it.
Right.
You got to have a command ejection system, because the pilot's sitting out in front, and he's got a better view of what the hell's happening than the guy in the back seat does. So anyway,
so he punches, but who went first? He went first.
He went first. Oh yeah.
Well, then why didn't he? Oh, his chute got tangled or something.
Okay. Well, here's what happened. This is what we think. Well, there are two possibilities. One, that somehow the seat was misrigged or something like that. I mean, I think that there had been something that happened to the airplane in the previous flight, that they had to reseat the seat or had to, redo something or other. I think they had to change the parachute or whatever the hell it was, because the guy in the back had picked up a hit or whatever it was in the previous flight, and there was some blood on the thing and all that. And, he was going to go back to the States or whatever the hell it was. But anyway, I mean, he wasn't seriously injured, but it was enough he had to go get some treatment.
So they had to change the canopy, apparently. Some other
Maybe they changed the canopy, but anyway, that's one possibility.
Okay.
The other possibility is, you're familiar with the Martin Baker seat. Did you have Martin Bakers?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
We had the same deal.
yeah,
Other one.
same deal. Okay. Now let's say this is what Jack says he did. He pulls the face curtain down here, and I guess the canopy went. And then he thought, and he says, "Wait a minute. This is probably the only time I'm ever going to eject. I want to see what's happening."
Yeah, I read that. That's in there.
And he lets it go. And of course, the canopy's gone. Face curtain flops over the top of the seat, goes down to the handle. Boom. drogue gun fires through the through the face curtain, and that, you know,
Yeah.
that's going to screw it all up there.
Yeah.
Jack remembers seeing the when they were pulling him out of the mud. Remembers seeing the parachute sitting there, you know, kind of. It wasn't deployed, but it was, the folds were spreading out, so it had flopped out of the container.
It's slowing down. So.
I mean, but
So how fast do you think you were going when you ejected? 250?
250 probably. 250,
About as slow as it'll fly.
Well, I was, you know, what I was doing was I was trading airspeed for, altitude for airspeed, and I was
Right.
running out of altitude.
Yeah.
I mean, I was trying to keep about 280, so I could be sure of having some maneuvering room.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm turning all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, just out of second nature. And of course, Jack goes out, and then about a second and a half later, I go out. So we just unloaded about 600 or 700 pounds from the front of the airplane.
At least.
So it's getting a little bit lighter, and it flies another 150 yards or 200 yards or whatever it is, and lands on a sandbar, turns up 270 degrees, and I think it broke off the
Radome.
radome.
Yeah.
But other than that, hey.
Yeah. Did you see it hit?
I got no swings in the chute
Really?
because, I mean, you know, the Martin Baker deploys horizontally like this, and my feet went down, and I never even got to the vertical. It was boo like that, and touchdown, and it was soft ground, and the canopy of the parachute collapsed over me. And then, you know, I'm out there, you know, I'm trying to get out from underneath.
What was your first thought?
Hell, I don't know. You know, you don't sit there and philosophize about, you know. I'm just trying to. My first, I guess, instinctively, I'm not going to sit there underneath the parachute. Okay, so I want to see what's going on. So I'm trying to get the parachute off the top of me, and I do, and I take my helmet off, and I look up, and here's an old man. I don't know how old, but, you know, obviously 60s or something like that. And he has in his hand what I judged to be a single-shot rifle that was probably constructed back in the 1800s. And he's pointing it at me, and he's shaking like a leaf.
Oh.
I mean, he's, you know, and he's, you know, he's a very brave man because he's, I mean, this is big stuff for him, you know. I mean, it's big stuff for me, too. And I said, boy, I think I'm going to move very slowly because I don't want him to. And those people were really pissed off. I mean, he marched me back up onto the top of the levee, and that's when the folks, you know, the locals showed up. And they're really pissed off. I mean, you know, it's like they had never seen a zipper in their life. You know, they got to cut your G-suit and all this other stuff off, and they managed to strip me of everything. And somebody...
And you never got your Rolex back, right?
I didn't have a Rolex.
Oh, I thought it said there. Maybe that was Jack.
That's Jack.
Yeah.
And I had... Jack got stabbed with a knife. I got stabbed with a, I guess it was a rock or something like that, and it didn't do any lasting damage. But I mean, they were getting serious, and all of a sudden, a guy showed up who was Eurasian. He was obviously part something else other than Vietnamese. I would judge he was French, you know, half French. Good-looking guy, probably in his late 30s. Early 40s, something like that. Spoke excellent English. And the first thing he did was scream at the peasants that were trying to do me in, you know. And then he grabbed me and he said, "Come with me." And he hauled me off. And about that time, one of the planes in the flight, I don't know. It may have been one of the A4s. There were some A4s on mission too. And that helped to get their heads down. And so, but, you know, we jumped down into a ditch briefly, and then he took me over and put me in a hut, thatched roof huts. Interestingly enough, when we were visiting our shoot-down site, I don't think there are any thatched roof huts left there. They were all permanent structures, But anyway, that evening, after the sun went down, they took me over to what I guess it was a quiz. I mean, they took me into this hut, and I had to kneel down in front of the head man, and there was an old guy that was obviously the political head of the village, and the guy that rescued me was his advisor, and he was the interpreter, and they were asking me questions, and I stuck with name, rank, and service number, and date of birth, like it says. Well,
So
anyway.
was this guy this Sven Oste?
Who?
It says journalist working for something or other. Sven Oste. They said that was the journalist that was the Eurasian fellow that came to you and said, "Come with me." That's what it says in here.
I don't think so. It wasn't a journalist. Let me see that. I haven't. That's news to me.
Look down under others. It says it names the other people.
But this has nothing to do with this incident.
Okay. I remember from the book that it said that
Sven Ost, journalist working for Dagen Snyder, is deceased. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that has nothing to do with my capture.
Oh, okay. All right.
This has to do with a picture that appeared in a publication that he wrote, I think.
Oh, okay. So you don't know who the Eurasian guy was then?
Huh?
The Eurasian guy that said, "Come with me," you don't know who that was then?
Actually, no idea who he was.
Oh, well.
And I've not seen him. I mean, I never saw him since.
Maybe I just tied the two together. Yeah.
You must have tied it together
Yeah.
because that, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
I mean,
So you weren't actually dealing with you didn't have the North Vietnamese Army right there at all.
that was the North Vietnamese Army.
Okay,
I
so
mean, there were regulars there. This was not out in the weeds. I mean, we were very close to Than Hoa. And,
well, you were probably glad to have the Army there, weren't you?
oh, you betcha. I mean, as a matter of fact, that's, that was well known. You're going to be better off dealing with the regular army than the civilians, for sure. At least, in North Vietnam.
Yeah, yeah. So
This guy was. The thing is that a mixed race guy is really looked down on by the Vietnamese. And, it's just like in Japan. I mean,
well, was he there? Did you ever figure out what he was there for? I mean, was he?
I never had the opportunity to sit down and talk with him and find out.
Oh.
Hey, who are you? What's the story? I mean, I guess I don't understand the question. He did not deal with me other than grabbing me and getting me into this hut, and then he was the one that was there when they took me in for this interrogation, which lasted about 5 minutes, and they decided that, they went back and forth, and
Yeah.
the head man, who was an older guy, and the Eurasian. And the Eurasian was the one that was interpreting. He was acting as an interpreter with the head man.
So when you went back there, was it been 4 years ago now? 2007, I think.
No, 2004. We were there in 2004.
2004. Well, when you went back all those years later, apparently some of the people you talked to had actually seen the event.
There was one guy there, and it points that out. He was probably a very young man when this happened. He may have been a teenager for all we know, but he accurately described the events that occurred, and he would have to have been there to see them, or else he would not have been able to supply the details. I mean, he pointed to Jack because our physical characteristics are different enough that he said, Jack, he points to Jack and, said, had the knife in his back.
Yeah.
And he landed over there on the outside of the levee, and I landed, there on the inside of the levee, and the airplane landed over there.
How did Jack survive anyway?
Huh?
How did Jack survive the eviction or the ejection? How did he do that?
He landed in the mud.
He must have skipped along or something.
No. He landed in a rice paddy in the mud. And when it knocked him cold as a wedge. And when he woke up, he was under the mud with his oxygen mask on, breathing emergency oxygen.
Oh.
Because our regulator, we for a number of years, we had a regulator that we got 100% oxygen. The regulator was specifically designed to function down to a depth of 75 to 100 feet of water.
Oh, wow.
Just like a scuba thing.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. That's.
Yeah, the picture painted in the book is this. They apparently from the air they saw one chute, yours, and they didn't see the other chute. And
the after action report includes a statement about two chutes, seeing two chutes.
And you guys never had a chance to get to your radios and use those, I guess, and so.
No.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, we weren't going to get. If we could have gotten out in the middle of the river there, we might have had a shot at having a helicopter come up and grab us. Because it was wide enough that they're not going to. I mean, they're going to be shooting at a helicopter that is out there.
Yeah.
But they're not going to. If we had landed in the middle of the river, there's no place we're going to escape and evade to. But it would have taken a while for them to get out to us.
Yeah. So we're coming to the end of this disc here, this tape here. Do you want to continue on and talk about it anymore? Or?
No, I think that's probably enough.
Okay. All right. Great. Let me just see if there's a couple of other questions. I don't want to talk about the POW stuff. Did you ever practice law? Yeah, you went to law
No,
school.
I didn't. I didn't pass the bar exam. Sorry about that.
You didn't try?
Oh, I tried twice.
Oh, really?
And I was in a pretty bad marriage, and I didn't have a lot of support from the.
Well, you're obviously a very, very, very smart guy. I mean,
well,
passing the bar. I mean, I took it the same time you did, approximately. I took it in '77, I guess, is when I took it.
I took it in '76 and again in '79.
Oh, really?
No, 80. I took it in '80, in the spring of '80.
Yeah, I took it the first time, and I on the multiple choice part, I got out of order at the end, and I missed all those questions, and that was enough to pass it, to flunk it. So I didn't pass it the first time I took it, and also they regraded one of my blue books. It started off as an 80, went down to 55. They regraded it 4 times. So I took it.
Well, I am not I did pretty good on the multi-state. I was okay on the multi-state, but I have a problem with essay exams, and I did not do good there.
My handwriting is really bad too.
But anyway, I'm sure that my story is that Pete Wilson, who was the mayor of San Diego, and then the senator, and then the governor, and all that kind of stuff, I think he didn't pass it until his 4th try.
Really?
Yeah. But
did you know Otto Boss?
Oh yeah.
You work for him, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
he's my neighbor.
I know Bob White pretty well.
Yeah, I just talked to Flossie a couple days ago.
Who?
Flossie Boss, Otto's wife.
Yeah, Otto passed away.
Yeah, Otto was just such a super guy. I ended up coaching both of his boys in soccer and baseball.
Yeah.
I've coached a lot of baseball.
All right.
They just live up the street. So I talked to Flossie the other day.
Are you a big baseball nut?
I like to coach baseball.
Oh.
And I watch the games occasionally, but the money's too big a deal to me. I mean, I just the kind of money they make and the way their cities get screwed over.
What would happen? My lady friend, her name is Carol Royalato, and her boys, or her kids, her son and daughter grew up with Kevin Kuzminoff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they lived. Carol and Kevin's mother were very close, and Kevin used to come over when he was a young kid and spend more time at at Carol's place with their kids, and then he spent it at home.
I got to ask. There's one more question I got to ask you.
Okay.
Your last military flight.
My last military flight was in an A4 two-seater when I finished law school.
So you're still in the Navy at the time?
Oh yeah, I went to law school when I was in the Navy.
Oh really?
They were very generous. You know, ordinarily in the Navy, you're not going to send you to law school unless you're willing to change your designator to JAG. You know, but anyway, there are some other people that did the same. I mean, they went to law school.
Well, you probably got a little better treatment because the 6 or 7 years prior to that had not been really good.
No, well, I mean, like I say, well, I spent 3 years in the Bureau of Naval Personnel, or 2 years in the Bureau of Naval Personnel, in officer distribution. Here's a factoid that I find to be very interesting. In PERS B1, which is officer distribution, and my numbers may be 1 or 2 off here, but in PERS B1, there were 14 naval aviators of the rank of lieutenant commander or below. Of those 14 naval aviators, 7 of us ended up in Hanoi.
How did that work out? Just luck?
We wrote our own orders. We all, you got to get back to the war, right? I'm serious.
Who was you told me there was a B-17 tail gunner, and they got shot down at Vietnam.
Yeah.
And he got shot down in Vietnam as well.
Yeah.
What was he flying in Vietnam?
He was either flying a 105 or an F4. I can't remember which, but I mean, he was.
Boy, what are the odds?
He was in Stalag something or other, for the last 6 or 8 months in Germany. And but the Germans, at least his experience was, they weren't mistreated particularly. I mean, who's the senior man? You're in charge and you take care of the way it's supposed to be, right? But he said the food is a real problem because towards the end of the war it was bad news, and it's not just them that weren't getting a lot to eat. Nobody was getting much to eat.
Yeah. I picked up a good book in the library. The library over here is terrific. They had so much aviation stuff you can't believe it. And there was a German interrogator. They called him, I think, the master interrogator. His name was Hans Schrapp, I think his name was, and he interviewed all the fighter pilots. And usually when the guys hit the ground, they knew what's
the German?
The Germans.
Yeah.
They had listening posts.
All that kind of stuff. Of course.
But then you went to college in Seattle.
Yes. Well, in 1940, after the December 42, they in the fall of, I think it was the fall of 42, they shut down the university academically, and the Army took over the campus.
Oh wow!
And so my dad, we had to move back down to Seattle, and so we moved back down to Seattle. And my dad was applying for a direct commission in the Army as a major. It was something that he, had been encouraged to do because of his language skills. With the understanding that after the war we were going to have to send people in to, run the, he was fluent. He taught German, French, Spanish, Italian, and the Romance languages. Yeah. And he also started studying Russian. We used to have they would ferry the B-17s to Russia through Fairbanks. And so I'd run into these, we would run into these Russian crews in downtown Fairbanks. They'd be shopping at the local drugstore or something, buying stuff for their wives or sweethearts, things that they'd never seen before in their lives. And we tuned into the tower frequencies, when they were leaving Ladd Field.
So you had an early interest in aviation then.
Oh, very much so. I built model airplanes, one serially from the age of about 6 or 7 on.
So now you went to college. What did you?
Well, here's what happened. We got to Seattle, and my dad was having some trouble passing the physical examination, and he was first diagnosed with anemia. So he began eating a lot of liver, and it was what he really had was leukemia.
Oh.
And he died of leukemia in early '43.
Oh, right.
So my mother is stuck, and my baby sister was born, I think I was 12 years old at the time. And so she never knew her father. She was six months old when my dad died. And we lived with some friends for a while, because here's my mother, you understand, with a 12-year-old son and a 6-month-old baby. And there was some insurance money, but eventually she had to go back to work, and she ended up striking a deal with one of my father's sisters, who was a school teacher, unmarried, my good old Aunt Minnie, who was like a second mother to me, and they went together, and Minnie bought a house on the GI Bill, and we all lived together. And so I went to high school at Renton Junior Senior High School, and then I went to University of Washington.
Did you get your commission out of that?
No, I joined the fraternity that my father was one of the charter members of, the chapter at the University of Washington of Alpha Delta Phi. Incidentally, Teddy Roosevelt was an Alpha Delta. That's one of the more famous ones that we claim. But and I worked my way through college. I hashed at I waited tables and washed dishes at the fraternity house in order to pay my house bill, and then I inherited through the fraternity house a job at a salmon cannery up in southeastern Alaska. The Waterfall Cannery, which is now the Waterfall Resort. I mean, people who are, and it was an idyllic place to spend the summer, I can tell you that. But anyway, and I'd come back in the fall with enough money to last, to pay my tuition and books and all that, and doing some part-time work going to school. So I worked my way through school.
So how'd you get a commission then?
Well, I don't want to. It's kind of a long story, but what happened was the third summer that I went up there. The first 2 summers I worked in the store, the company store. I was a storekeeper in the company store. The third year I wanted to work on a boat, on a cannery tender.
Oh boy!
And I went on as a deckhand on a cannery tender, and it was home ported in Seattle. So we'd drive it up to the cannery in the spring, and then drive it back in the fall. Well, I ended up not being able to get credit for some courses, and so when it comes the spring of 1953, when I'm supposed to be graduating, I am some credits shy of being able to graduate. And then, and incidentally, when I was working up there as a storekeeper, one of my duties was to be the mailman. And the only way you could get to the cannery was by amphibian airplane or boat. Well, there was a regular service, Ellis Airlines out of Ketchikan, that would have the mail service up there. So they'd come through 3 or 4 times a day. I got to know the pilots because I'd meet every airplane that came in. There were a bunch of Grumman Gooses that surplus out of World War II, and anyway, a bunch of Navy guys. And I had the opportunity on a couple of occasions to hop in the right seat when they didn't have any passengers. They're going to fly up to an Indian village and then come back. Mm-hmm. No passengers. Hey, kid, you want to ride? And I'd ask Charles Bradford, Brad, who was my boss, he was the chief accountant there, if I could, take 30 minutes off. He said, yeah, go ahead, lock the store. And so I got to sit in the right seat a couple of times and take off and come back and all that kind of stuff.
And you were hooked.
Yeah, I was hooked. And and I was an ROTC, Army ROTC, because when I first registered in the fall of '49, there's no war going. Furthest thing from my mind was the prospect of military service. University of Washington is a land-grant institution. 2 years of ROTC required.
Oh.
So I happened to be in the Army line and at registration, so I just signed up for Army ROTC, paying no attention to it. Of course, over the summer, I'd gotten about 6 chunks of mail from the Navy saying, "Oh, come take the tests for the regular program and all this kind of stuff," and into the circular file, right?
Yeah.
The spring of '53, I was about ready to be commissioned as a second lieutenant in the Army, infantry. And if I'm not mistaken, the Korean War was not quite wrapped up yet. Maybe it was, but in the process, one afternoon in the spring, I was laying on the roof of my cousin's house in Laurelhurst, which is very close to the University of Washington campus, and it's only about 1.5 miles from Sandpoint Naval Air Station. And the Blue Angels flew overhead, flying, if I'm not mistaken, F-9 F-2s, yeah. And I said to myself, I want to do that. And I had a couple of fraternity brothers who'd gone down to Navy flight training, so I went out to Sandpoint and took the tests and all that kind of stuff, and it was accepted. And so I went in to resign my Army ROTC commission because the last 2 years, junior and senior year, you got a small stipend. It was not a lot of money, but I had to pay it in order to get out of the obligation. And then I started flight training in the fall of '53. And
So they took the Army commission, changed it into a Navy commission.
I didn't get commissioned there. I went into the aviation cadet program.
Oh.
And I knew all about the aviation cadet program from one of my fraternity brothers who had gone down and started flight training and then decided he didn't like it, and he came back. He was a Navy Reserve guy, and he just reverted to he was a Navy Reserve enlisted guy. He reverted to his Navy Reserve status, and then he applied for and got accepted in the ROTC program. So he lost about a year, I guess. But he talked to me about the Aviation Cadet Choir. And at that time, the Naval Aviation Cadet Choir was a big recruiting thing. And I joined the choir 2 weeks after I got into pre-flight. And 5 weeks after I started pre-flight, I got my uniforms early, along with a couple of other guys that were contemporaries of mine, and off we go to New York, and we sang in the Ed Sullivan Show. And of course, my mother went crazy and all that sort of thing. And we had it lengthened out our training by about 3 months. But the summer of '54, we were gone all the time. In the summertime, we flew out to, among other things that we did, we flew out to Long Beach, California to sing at the Miss Universe contest, and then we escorted the Miss Universe contestants to a big ball that evening. So, there were lots of fringe benefits. Had a ball, but I got commissioned and got my wings in April of '55.
And and your first airplane out of that was?
The FJ-3.
The FJ-3. Why don't you show us
This
what
one
that
right
looks
here.
like?
I and my best buddy, Fred Hazlett, God rest his soul, we went all the way through flight training together, went through advanced flight training together because we were both in the choir. We got our commission and wings the same day, reported to Moffett Field, awaiting the recommissioning of Air Group 21. On the first, it was supposed to be, it was recommissioned on the 1st of July, 1955, to get FJ-3s, this airplane right here. And
No, the Air Force call it the Sabre. What did the Navy call it?
the Fury. Interestingly enough, North American first proposed this design, this basic design, to the Navy, because North American had built an FJ-1 for the Navy, which was a straight wing airplane. And they didn't buy very many of them. But when they came up with the swept wing design, the Navy, and I think that I don't know if there were still battleship admirals running the thing or not, but anyway, they said, oh, we can't land a swept wing airplane on an aircraft carrier. And so they turned around to the Air Force and they said, hey, it looks good to us, so we'll buy them. And then, of course, it became famous in Korea. And somewhere along there, the Navy got interested. And my first commanding officer was a man by the name of Paul Pugh, who, as a lieutenant commander, in probably 53 or 54, somewhere in there, about a year before he came to take over the squadron, was on exchange duty with the Air Force, flying F-86s out of Japan and then Korea. And he, in order of rank, he was the number 2 guy in the squadron. Somehow, the skipper of the Air Force squadron, he got sick or whatever the heck it was, and so Paul ended up, at least temporarily, being in command of the squadron. And in about 2 weeks, they went to Korea. In about 2 weeks, Paul got 2 confirmed kills and a probable. And I don't think anyone else in the squadron got a shot at a MiG. And so they said, and this is, my understanding is that the Air Force said, hey, we can't stand, we're not going to put up with this kind of publicity, and they shipped him back to Japan. Paul, back to Japan. There someplace is a book, and I don't know if you know the name Jabara, an Air Force officer by the name of Jabara was either the number 2 or number 3 ace or maybe the number 1 ace in Korea. And he was Paul Pugh's wingman. And he said, Paul Pugh taught me everything I know about combat.
Yeah, well.
And I was fortunate enough to be Paul's wingman for 2 years, and I'll tell you, he was something else.
So what kind of missions did you fly with the
just
FJ3?
at this time we're just flying in the daytime. I mean, off the ship anyway. Is what I'm saying. No, we didn't fly the FJ3 off of the ship at night at that time. But we did. It was just a fighter mission, air to air, primarily air to air. We shoot gunnery and all that kind of stuff.
What would the airplane? Was this a supersonic airplane?
No. Well, it was technically. We got our mockbusters pinned. The only way you could break the speed of sound is if you in a dive.
Yeah. In fact, there's what was her name? The lady pilot that broke the sound barrier with one. Cochran, right. I think she went 1.1 or something like that.
Yeah.
Probably in a dive.
Yeah, but the FJ3 didn't have it simply wasn't designed, didn't have the thrust, didn't have enough thrust to overcome the drag in level flight to get supersonic.
Right.
You could get transonic, but couldn't get supersonic.
Was there some evil handling characteristics as you approached the
it was a
mock?
wonderful airplane. Absolutely wonderful airplane.
Yeah.
Very sensitive controls. I mean, it was super sensitive.
And how many hours did you end up with it?
Well, in 2 years, I probably got, let me see, I must have gotten 1,000 hours or something like that, 800, 900,000 hours. I had made a cruise on the Bon Armour Shard, and there's always has been and always will be in the U.S. Navy a Bon Armour Shard, because that was John Paul Jones's flagship. And the Bon Armour Shard at that time was an Essex class carrier that had been converted to an angle deck. It still had a wooden flight deck, but we made a cruise.
So the difference between that and F-86 is it had a longer strut, landing gear in the front, so it sat on an angle.
Yeah, it did have a little bit longer nose strut, but of course it's built a little bit stronger because of the stresses of operating off the carrier.
Mm-hmm.
But and it had a J65, which I think the F-86H did. I can't remember what model, but I mean it was comparable to an F-86H, I think.
Yeah, I want to talk to you more about the launching off the carrier.
Okay.
In a little bit.
Oh yeah.
So then, now were you out of the cockpit for a while before you got into the F-8 then?
No. What happened was we came back. I mean, it was Paul Pugh was the skipper. The executive officer was a guy by the name of Donald Cook Red Dog Davis, who was one of the most colorful people I've ever run across. And we JOs, we nuggets, there were a bunch of us in the squadron. We thought that's what the Navy was like. You know, we thought everybody in the Navy was like that. And it turned out we had two of the most outstanding officers, leaders, and pilots in the Navy. At least that was our humble opinion. And I mean, Paul made Rear Admiral, which was remarkable because he had a tendency to be a little. I spoke at his memorial service over here at Fort Rosecrans because I got to know his boys and his daughter and his wife. I named my daughter after Paul's wife, Clarine. My daughter's name is Clarine. Anyway, I said, and Fred Hazlett, who I had mentioned before, who I went, you know, we'd spent all the time in the squadron together. I said, Paul did not suffer fools gladly. And Fred piped up and he said, that's not quite correct. Paul did not suffer fools, period. Regardless of rank. And so he
So how did he ever make admiral?
Well, I mean, he told me a couple of times, he said, I'll never make admiral. But he did. And Red Dog made 4 stars. Red Dog was went all the way.
Let me back up a little bit.
Yeah.
Tell me about your first solo flight.
First solo flight in an SNJ. T6 to you Air Force people.
Yeah.
In fact, on the Midway, there's a SNJ on the hangar deck. Have you been to the Midway?
11, and this is an oral history interview with Charles Everett Southwick, Captain USN, retired. And he's going to tell us about his history with the Navy and a few other things. And my name is Ron Carrico, and I'm going to conduct the interview. That's just the overview here. So
The people that fly airplanes, especially military airplanes, are mostly Type A personalities, and so we don't seem to have much trouble talking.
Well, a fighter pilots especially, I think. Well, I don't know. Especially at the bar on a Friday night.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Then you see all this.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'm going to start off by saying this is the San Diego Air and Space Museum is gathering and archiving oral histories of significant aviation interest. Hopefully they will one day all be available online. That's the idea.
Oh, okay.
Currently the catalog is online, but to view, listen, or read the transcriptions, the histories are only available at the library itself, so you have to actually come down here. The object of the interview is to record the personal histories of interest in aviation highlights. Hopefully it's an hour and a half to 2 hours long. I'm going to try and ask simple and relevant questions with some follow-up for clarifications. We'll start with all the mundane stuff first, and hopefully we can end with some personal insights. After we complete the tape, I'll have it transcribed for you to review, edit, and clarify where necessary. And I have a donation form for you to sign later. It'll be to donate the interview to the museum to be archived. So here we are. It's August the 3rd, 2011. We're in the boardroom of the San Diego Air and Space Museum. It's 1 o'clock. And with me is Captain Charles Everett Southwick, otherwise known as Ev Southwick. So we're going to go real simple questions. Where were you born?
I was born in Fairbanks, Alaska on the 6th of October, 1931 in St. Joseph's Hospital on the banks of the Chena River. We used to refer to it as the Chena Slough. But,
What were your parents' names and occupations?
my father was named Charles Ulysses Southwick. And he was actually, when I was born, he was, I believe, the professor of English and foreign languages at College, Alaska, which became a university in about 1936 or 30, I think it was 1936 or 37. And it grew bigger, but he was pretty much the humanities department because College, Alaska was a mining engineering school, and it was the only institution of higher learning in Alaska.
Wait, how about your mom? What did she do?
She, my mom was a housewife. I mean, they met in Seattle. My dad was in World War I as a doughboy and went to school on the equivalent of the GI Bill starting at about 1918, I guess.
Wow.
18 or 19, and he was class of 23 out of the University of Washington. And my mother's name was Elizabeth, maiden name Miller, and she was she was born in the Palouse country in southeastern Washington, the wheat country. A large family. She had, I think she was the middle of 11 children.
Wow. So you moved back down to Seattle then, and went to high school in Seattle?
I finished high school in Seattle. What happened is, I don't want to belabor this, but in 1941, after the attack on Pearl Harbor, in fact, I was standing with my mother at the age of 10 in our kitchen on the campus of College, Alaska, outside of Fairbanks, 5 miles outside of Fairbanks, when the announcement was made about the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. And I was old enough to know that was a significant thing. I mean, my dad followed the news and all that sort of thing. So there was a discussion in the house that kind of clued me in as to what was going on. And there was a great deal of concern. I look back on it now, but my dad became an air raid warden. They had they had curtains on the windows and turned the lights out at night and the whole